Welcome back to Season 2 of the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and I am so grateful that you're joining us. When I started this podcast last year, my primary goal was to normalize the experience of imposter syndrome, to make it easier for us to talk about, and to access the support that we deserve. I am so grateful to everyone who has shared their stories with me, and I'm fascinated by the linkages between imposter syndrome and so many other facets of our lives. The conversations that we had last season led us in so many powerful directions. I'm excited to continue these conversations in Season 2. As always, if you have a story to share, please reach out to me. I would love to interview you. And if I can ever support you on your own imposter syndrome journey, I'd love to connect on that too. Thanks again for being here. Welcome, Ilhiana. I am so excited to be having this conversation with you this morning, and I would love to have you introduce yourself to anyone listening today.
Yes. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here with you this morning. And I'm Ilhiana Rojas. I'm an executive and career transformation strategy coach. And what I do is I basically help other professionals, other women, people of color, which is most of my clients, just find their extraordinary and reach their extraordinary, both in their professional and in their personal lives. And that could be in a lot of different ways. And it really stems from after a 20-year career in corporate where I built many businesses to success. I realized that although that was fun, what I really enjoyed to do was to help my teams become high-performing teams or help my direct reports become really good leaders and maximize their potential. So that's when I realized that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, is help others reach and maximize their full potential, like I said, from a professional or even a personal perspective. So that's where I stand now today.
I love it. I think that's so great. It's very inspirational. And, I'm curious, given the course of your career and you've had some twists and turns and have, gone from corporate to entrepreneurship, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? And has it shown up at all in your journey?
Oh my God, it's shown up a lot of times. Now, I have to tell you that I didn't know what imposter syndrome was until I started this new journey 3 years ago. And maybe if I would have known what it was during my career, I could have probably addressed it and not thought that I was just going crazy. So it was until recently, like I said, 3 years ago, that I found out what it was. I just thought it was interesting, and still I had to read to realize that it's just about those moments when we doubt ourselves, when we think that we don't have the skills, we don't have whatever it takes to take on a new challenge, to take on a project, and we start going down this rabbit hole of doubts, that maybe we don't have what it takes to make something successful, that maybe others believe that we can do something that we don't believe that we can, and I can see now that throughout my previous life, I went into that imposter syndrome several times. And it was hard because you start blaming yourself, or you start believing things that are not necessarily true. And those start becoming important barriers for you to be successful or achieve whatever you feel is successful in life. And most importantly, you don't feel fulfilled. You just feel like you're surviving by the day, trying to go by, and hopefully a miracle will happen and something changes, and like somebody comes in and rescues you from that point, right? And it can go from a couple of days to, in my case, of one of these scenarios, to a couple of years, and it's not a healthy place to be in. So I wish I would have known that during that period of my time, that there's a name to it, and there's a way to address it and resolve it.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest responses that I've gotten to anytime I talked about imposter syndrome. The general response is, oh, wow, I'm so glad this is a thing, right? Like I'm so glad to know it's not just me. I'm not crazy, that this is a recognized phenomenon that so many people experience. And that's why I'm having these conversations, right? To try to create even more awareness, because it is, to your point about lack of fulfillment, right? It's such an uncomfortable place to be. It's so hard to get through the day, the week, the year, when you just have this constant sense of self-doubt and I don't belong here and I'm not doing this right. People are going to find out. I mean, that's just not a sustainable feeling. Have you noticed, now that you do know what it is, have you noticed any themes or patterns to when it showed up for you?
Um, I'd have to go back. I think the biggest thing is when change, not exactly when change in roles has happened, because I actually love change, and that actually drives me. So it's not when the change happens. It's maybe once that change has settled, and sort of that initial excitement and driving force for doing something new, doing something challenging, when that has sort of peaked, and now it's more on the still sustaining growth, still looking to do things different, but the peak has stopped. That's, I believe, when that imposter syndrome, not in every case, but in most cases, starts to set in of, okay, now I'm here. I was thinking about this yesterday. I view it as being in this hanging bridges that are like 60 feet above ground. And you just like get on it because you're excited about what's going to happen on the other side, or because of the view. And you're just like walking through it. And then suddenly halfway through, you look down and you realize that you're like in the middle of the air, and like your depends on a couple of woods and some handrails that you're holding on to. I see it that way. Like I jump on the bridge, I start walking like all excited, and then suddenly halfway through I look down and I'm like, what happens? Like, am I really going to be able, how did I get here, and am I going to be able to get to the other side? I see it sort of that same way. That's, I believe, when it happens.
That's a great analogy. And I think, you're right that when the change is coming, we have this adrenaline rush and there's all this excitement. And then once you settle in a bit, it's like, uh-oh, now I'm actually here. Now I actually have to do something with this, right? And have you, obviously, when you're not aware that this is what's happening, it's harder to pay attention to this, but do you find that you have skills or strategies or approaches that you've used to try to manage it when it does happen?
Yeah. So now that I'm conscious that this is a thing and that it's not me going crazy or anything, I've now learned to recognize those moments when it happens, so that I can then, to your point, use a couple of strategies to pull me out of that moment, right? So recognizing when this is happening is being very conscious about when you wake up in the morning and you are like, I don't want to get up out of I don't have the energy to get out of bed, or you're not excited about the day ahead, or you're fearful of something that's going to happen. And all these questions start to come in your mind. Am I up to it? Am I going to be able to do this? Like the feeling of self-doubt is really like, do I have what it takes? And that becomes an overwhelming feeling that pressures you, and it can pressure you even in a physical sense. Like I've had feelings of pressure on your chest, like you feel like the weight of the world is in your shoulders, like you're dragging your feet to work, or at least moving from your bedroom to your home office, whatever it is. But it just takes a considerable amount of energy for you to get to doing something. I've now come to recognize that in part that could be imposter syndrome, because you're starting to have all these doubts of something, and in a way it's sort of your body pushing you back and keeping you in a safe zone, while you process this whole thing, right? So that's when I become conscious. Okay, these signals are happening again. Why is it? What's bringing me down? Is it just that I'm truly tired, or is it something else? And what I found is, first, journaling has helped me a lot. Just like grabbing a piece of paper, grabbing a journal, and just for 5 minutes or 2 minutes, like start writing whatever comes to mind, like with no specific reason, just pulling things out. And normally I've realized that in that process, all of these feelings start to emerge, start to come out from the mind to the paper, and I start realizing. So that's one of the things. And then with that, then comes recognition, right? That, okay, this is happening. Then what's causing that self-doubt? What's causing that anxiety? What's causing that fear? And again, through writing it down and questioning those things, you can start to noodle and say, how much of this is real? How much of this is I'm just amplifying it and playing it in my head? Because sometimes we play things larger than what they really are. But once we write them down, once we start speaking them out, even to thin air, they start to sort of focus and refocus and realize maybe it's not as bad as I thought in the beginning. But you can then start acting on it by becoming conscious of the reality versus just the feeling.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. I know for me, and I've said this many times, that I'm a high anxiety person. So my mind can be a really dangerous place.
Yeah.
And if I don't get it out of my head, if I don't just put it out into the world somehow, it has such a crippling effect. And just saying it out loud, writing it down, the things that you're talking about, and then being able to analyze it a little bit more objectively. It's obviously never 100% objective, but to be able to look at it through an external lens and say, oh, okay, maybe this isn't as bad as I think it is, or there's something I can do about it. There's action I can take to make it better.
Yep. Yeah. And then there's another thing that I realized that it's helped me a lot, and I use also with my clients, is when you're writing things down. I love now to write. I didn't before, and now I have to say it's really helped me a lot. And writing things down in two lists: the things that you can control and the things that you cannot control. Because sometimes I found, at least myself, that we start worrying and getting overwhelmed and anxious about things that are completely out of our control. And that just generates even, bigger anxiety and bigger, negative emotions that just pull you down. So by separating these lists and saying, okay, these are the things that I can control and these are the things that I can't, at least I've put them down and I can put them to the side so they're not bothering me in my head. To your point, our mind is a very powerful thing that can take us to other places. And then with the list of the things that I can control, at least now I can take action, right? And see what are the low hanging fruits. What are the things that I can quickly take off that list so that they at least not continue to build on the anxiety and the stress that this whole thing is causing. So it helps add perspective into this whole feeling of craziness that you feel at that moment in time.
I like that too, especially now where there is a lot that's out of our control. I mean, we're all collectively anxious about the state of the world and politics and everything that's going on around us. And so it's hard sometimes to distinguish between my personal anxiety and the sort of universal anxiety that we're all experiencing. And so carving it up between what's in my control, what can I actually do something about, and what's just stuff that is out of my control. It's not necessarily not going to affect me in some way, but I'm going to focus on, from an action perspective, the things that are within my control. Makes us feel like we have more agency than we think we do.
Yeah. And for many of us, not everybody, but for many of us that are empaths in some way, they're empathetic, that because we care for others and our work deals with feeling with others, sometimes we react to those feelings and take them as our own, and we don't realize that the anxiety, maybe it's not our anxiety. Maybe it's somebody else's anxiety. So again, putting things down into perspective can help you at least acknowledge it and do something about it. And it's not that you're ignoring it. It's not that you're saying, I don't care. It just helps to put things into perspective.
Absolutely. And I have another question for you. You mentioned early on that the majority of your clients are people of color. Do you notice, and I've talked about this on the show, I've interviewed other people who have talked about the experience of, first of all, feeling different from the people around you. So if you're in a majority white culture and a majority male dominated culture, whatever it is that makes you feel different has a tendency to make us feel self-doubt. We start to question what's wrong with me, or start to think, why am I not more like the people around me? Right. And I've had a number of people talk about the fact that the self-doubt is often imposed upon us from other people. So it's this sense that, maybe the people around me are questioning my legitimacy or looking at me through a more skeptical lens. And that's generating self-doubt. Do you see that? Is there anything that you would say is different about the experience for women of color, people of color more generally?
Yes, I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on that area. And because there were some set standards, right, of a criteria that for many, many years has been believed to be the criteria for people to succeed in a corporate ladder, or just in general, right? That you need to behave a certain way, you need to, dress yourself a certain way, you need to act a certain way, you need to be a certain way to then be able to be successful, because those were the role models that existed at the time. And that still, many of them still exist at the time. So as a person of color, then you believe that you have to stop being yourself and adapt who you are to those set standards, because that's going to be the only way to reach the top, right? And there have been many successful people of color that have reached, and women of color that have reached the top, and that they could argue that they did that because they adapted, their way of being to these set standards. So I think now that, this whole movement is coming, and this new reality of, it's really all about diversity of thought. It's really all about being yourself and bringing your full self to work, that creates actually that new successful model, because it's the diversity that's going to bring in innovation. It's all of those things that are going to help us in these times. And now we need to break those paradigms from before of what success means. And how do you reach success? Now, it will take time, because we still don't have those role models, or we don't have a lot of role models at the top in leadership positions that can break those paradigms, and that can say, hey, I don't need to, I didn't dress this way, I didn't act this way, I didn't do things this way, and still I'm here, and I am, successful professional and look at everything that I've accomplished. It's still just a handful of people that are in those places that are creating those new models. So it'll be a journey, but the good thing is that I see more and more, especially through the last 6 months, people being open to it and questioning and interested in seeing, okay, clearly the models from before are not efficient or effective or real anymore. How do we now shift it? How do we change the conversation? How do we change our practices, our thoughts, our way of being to be able to then carve the path, a new path and new criteria for everybody to be able to grow, whether you are person of color, white, man, woman, it doesn't matter. It's just you showing up to who you are and knowing and embracing that to on that path to success.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. And I think that's, the authenticity piece is such an important part of the inclusion and belonging conversation, because I think, for a long time it was, we'll hire people who are diversity candidates, but in order to succeed, you need to conform. You come in and then you need to figure out how to be more like the white man, even though there's backlash for doing so for women and people of color, right? It's complicated. And so we almost feel set up for failure in a lot of these environments. What advice do you have because I know you do a lot of career coaching, right? What advice do you have for somebody who's maybe in an environment that you're not seeing those role models? It feels like an uphill battle. The self-doubt is largely influenced by the environmental conditions that are happening around them. What options do you see that they have available to them, whether it means staying, leaving? What would you say to somebody in that situation?
I would encourage them to reach out to others. Like sometimes we get so focused and immersed in our world, right? We don't realize that our world is like very, very small. There's so many other people, other things that we can expand to, and that you can reach out to those to get support, to get knowledge, to get best practices, to get a mentor, to grow, right? Personally and professionally, and then use that to be able to then come back into your world and influence your world, right? We sometimes feel that we need to do this on our own. And that we have to figure it out on our own. And that's not really the case. The journey, and I strongly believe that a successful journey is built with people that support you by your side. And I did a lot of my journey on my own, to be honest, because I was I grew that way with that belief in mind. And although I accomplished a lot of things, I now realize that it took a lot to me, and it took a toll several times over that I could have avoided if I would have reached out to others. So I think sometimes if we believe that where we are is where we need to be and where we're going to be able to be the change makers, then we need to open ourselves to reach out to others, maybe in different spaces, in other organizations, expand our network, just so that we can then lean on them, have them help us see things in a different way, gain new perspectives, gain new knowledge, gain new skills, habits, behaviors, and bring them back so that we can be then the change maker that's required to evolve our own world. And if we feel like even doing that, it's not worth it because that world is just not open to it, then yes, then maybe it's time to move on to a different world, to a different phase, to a different part of our lives and do it there. But I say a lot of us, we don't realize that we start surviving instead of living, and we don't realize it. I did it myself for many, many years. So if it doesn't start clicking, like, again, acknowledge what's happening. Is it worth it? Expand it, and then make the decision. Do I stay or do I go? But just surviving I don't think is an option.
I agree. And I think what you're describing is empowering because it gives us choices, right? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, a lot of women of color in particular, there's this sense that there's a power imbalance in our workplaces. And we often feel like we don't have the kind of leverage or power, opportunity, influence, however you want to think about it, to create the kind of change that we're talking about. And we all have to decide as individuals whether that's a path we want to go down, right? Not everybody wants to take that on. And like you said, not every organization is open to it. So that's a personal choice. But what I love about what you're talking about in terms of reaching out to others is that often we look throughout history at the trailblazers in a vacuum, right? We see well, at the top of my mind these days is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? We look at her story and she's so heroic to so many of us. And there's certainly many more like her, but we don't necessarily think about the complex web of support around her that she created and that, helped her to navigate all of the conflict and uncertainty and challenges that she faced along the way. So I love what you're saying is, don't take this on your own. Don't be a hero. Right? We have more support available to us than we think we do. And there's no reason for anybody to feel like they have to take the weight of the world on their own personal shoulders in these situations.
Yeah, totally.
I love that. And then at the end of the day, the message, and not that I want anyone to think of this as necessarily the first choice, although in some situations it may be. But at the end of the day, everyone has the opportunity to go someplace else. I never want anyone to feel like a hostage in an environment that doesn't respect and appreciate them for who they are, who contributes to the kind of unfulfillment and stress and dissatisfaction that we're talking about.
Correct. And I love what you're saying. In the end, it is our choice. And it's easy to say it. It's very hard to do. Again, through my life, especially my last 3 years of corporate, I knew I had the choice to move out and start my new entrepreneurship life or whatever that would have been. I was just so afraid. I was just so paralyzed by the what ifs and what if I fail and what if, I'm not able to make it in the world and what it, all these what ifs. So in many cases, that fear then stops you and say, I prefer to be in this safe, maybe not so good environment, filled of anxiety, filled of all these not so positive feelings, but I prefer to live through this than to take that big leap and into the unknown and see what happens. Now looking back after making that leap and seeing that yes, everything is fine and thriving, I'm like, I shouldn't have taken 3 years of my life to make that choice. I should have done it sooner rather than later. But it is in the moment, I understand the feeling of, oh my God, maybe, no, yes. And sometimes you need something else to kick you basically and push you and say, that's not the path. This is the path. And if you're not taking the step, we're taking it for you, right? And sometimes that's what it takes. But at the end, when you know that path is not that path, you have to make that choice.
You're absolutely right. And I hope that's a point of inspiration for people listening to you, is to ask yourself if you're in that situation, because I do think that it's a natural human reaction to prefer what's comfortable and familiar, even if it makes us miserable, because it's the devil we know, right? And the alternative, that really scary and sort of ambiguous future that we can't get our arms around, feels a lot more threatening to us than what we've already been doing and have figured out to some extent. It's like, yeah, this is terrible, but at least I know what to expect, right?
Exactly.
So I hope that for anyone who's listening, who's nodding their head and recognizes themselves in that scenario, will kind of take a lesson from you and say, I don't want to be here 3 years from now thinking back, I wish I had done this sooner.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of your experience now as an entrepreneur, how has imposter syndrome changed for you? Do you still experience it? Is it different?
I still experience it. Yes, of course. Is it different? Yes, because now I know what it is. Now I know when it happens that it's happening, and I have tools and tactics to be able to counteract it, which is good. So it normally takes me maybe a day to overcome it and keep moving forward versus days, weeks, months to get over it. But yes, of course, it still happens. It's still, oh my God, am I going to be able to do this? This new project happened. Do I have the skill set and the knowledge? What if I fail? What if they find out that I can't do it? Do I really am I really able to? Yes, of course it happens. And it's funny because in one of the many hats that I wear, I have a lot of conversations with CEOs in big Fortune 500 companies. And while we prepare for those conversations, because they're, conversations like the ones that we're having right now, you talk to the person to get to know them prior to that conversation. And I always find it fascinating to know that these, very top known CEOs that have gone through so many marvelous things, they go through it as well. And they have these moments and that, I don't want to say it makes me feel good, but at least it makes me feel relieved that it's like, okay, so, it's just something. I think it's a natural that we all go through, no matter where we are in our path and in our career. It's still something that we need to learn to acknowledge and accept, and then just manage it and move on.
I love that. And I think that's such an important point, because I do think that we hide this well. Most of us, all of us really have been motivated for so long to fake it till we make it, right? To pretend that everything is fine, to not be vulnerable. And so when we look around and we're not seeing vulnerability on the part of anyone else, including the Fortune 500 CEOs that you're talking about, right? It seems like everyone else's path is so much simpler than ours. Wow, how come everyone else can do it and I can't? Or why is it so much harder for me, which compounds the self-doubt and the anxiety, right? So my personal mission in the context of these conversations and just more generally is to strip out all of that, fake, that the facade that's happening, right? And let's just all admit that it's not easy, that we all go through this, and that doesn't make us weak. It actually makes us stronger, because think of all the things we accomplish in spite of all of the things that we tell ourselves and the stress that we put ourselves through, right? It makes the accomplishments that much more remarkable that we were willing to push through that in order to get there. So I think it's something to be proud of, not something to be ashamed of.
And I love something that you just said, and I think, and I go through that with many of my clients, or with all of them, is we don't give ourselves enough credit for the things that we've accomplished. Many, like all of them, have, when we go through everything that they've accomplished in their lives, once we write it down, we go through it, they go like, oh my God, did I do all of this? Because I think we get to what we did, we put it aside, and then we keep going, right? But then when we look back at all the marvelous things we've accomplished, like, we've done some pretty great things, and we don't give ourselves that credit. So I love what you're saying, because we need to celebrate more.
Yes, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you there. This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but what motivated you to want to tell your story today? What do you hope people will take away from it?
I think the biggest thing is when I started the conversation. I didn't know this was a thing. I didn't know that imposter syndrome existed. Maybe I had heard the word somewhere, but I was like, yeah, I don't know what that is. And to me, I think now knowing what it is and that I'm not alone and that it is a thing and that I can, work through it has helped me so much. So to me, that is, I think, the biggest thing. And kudos to you for putting these together, because I think it's important that people realize when they're going through it and that they're not alone and that they can reach out to people, even if it's just like Googling, right? What can I do? Whatever it is, so that they don't get stuck in this awful feeling of unfulfillment and distress and anxiety that can really take a physical toll on us, not only mentally and emotionally, but it can also be have physical repercussions, which are not good. So that to me is, as long as anybody that's hearing this or any other of your conversations, something clicks and they realize, hey, I'm not alone and they can do something about it, I think that's it. Our job is done.
I love it. Thank you so much, Ilhiana. I always love talking to you and really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.